bowling first ball. What an absolutely shattering start.
If there have been compromises made, then potentially those compromises have been around playing the very best standard of first-class cricket in our home environment.
Anderson is bowled, it's all over. England humiliated, and Australia have retained the Ashes.
If Test cricket's going to get back to where it is, then they've got to stop prioritising four-day cricket again.
The notion of reducing counties is in my opinion, is obviously quite ridiculous.
When it comes to players and coaching, we've lost some of perhaps the traditional basics.
As Cummins bowls now, and he steps away, he's bowled. What a ghastly dismissal, which really sums it up.
Not easy listening for England cricket fans, but as Joe Root's team return home from Australia, many, including those in charge of the game, have begun to reflect on how the Test side can come back from such a crushing defeat. Tom Harrison, the England and Wales Cricket Board's chief executive, says the English county game needs to be reset to benefit the Test team. So we will hear from the county player that some have targeted as the example of why the domestic game is to blame. And as some voices call for a slimming down of the county game, we will be in the boardroom of one whose existence could be under threat. We'll also take a look at player development with former England batter and batting coach Mark Ramprakash, and we will try to learn lessons from New Zealand to see how the World Test champions managed to compete in all formats of the game. That is all coming up, but first let me introduce you to this week's panel, because Dan and Nesta are both away, so we can say hello to three first-timers on the sports desk. Patrick Geary is a BBC sports reporter and has been covering the Ashes for the BBC. Hi, Paddy.
Hello, hopefully my debut's better than an England opener's. But yeah, good.
I like it. We've started strong already. We also have Andrew Miller, who is the UK editor of ESPN Crick Info. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Sarah. Looking forward to getting stuck in.
Yeah, and also probably looking forward to getting stuck in as well as Nick Holt from the Daily Telegraph. He's the chief cricket correspondent, has just arrived back in the UK this morning. So perhaps a little bit tired, jaded, jet-lagged, like many of those players potentially.
Yeah, no, most of those players were on my flight actually, so that was an interesting journey given some of the things that have been written over the last couple of weeks.
Good chats, nice and friendly.
Good chats, yeah. It was all friendly, yeah.
Oh, very good. Well, Nick, I'm going to start with you then, because we're obviously all here in the UK. We were watching it on from here, but you were obviously over there, and I just wonder whether you got a sense of it feeling in any way different to what you were seeing and reading and hearing about from people who experienced it in the UK.
It probably felt worse being there, I would think. This is my fifth Ashes tour, and I would say on a playing level, it was comfortably the worst that I've covered, the worst England performance. It was worse than the 5-0 in 13-14 because for the first three tests when the Ashes were alive, they actually competed in each of those three test matches. This time they didn't compete really in any game whatsoever. Barely think of one whole day that they dominated. And they had lots of planning, lots of preparation went into it, and it just all went badly wrong from literally the first ball, as you mentioned earlier, for Rory Burns at the Gabba. So it never recovered from that point and just got worse.
And Andrew, it's interesting because the talk is all now about, an inquest and where does it go from here. But, this has happened before. So is there anything different now, 4 years on from the last one, that suggests there might be fundamental change?
Well, the only real difference, I think, is the fact that the last time around 4 years ago, it was pretty much the same team, same captain. First time in 100 years we had the same captain for an Ashes tour, which says something about the lack of impetus to change. But of course, last time around, it was building towards the 2019 World Cup. Pretty much everything about English cricket in that period was white ball focused. And ultimately, you cannot deny that the delivery of that World Cup in the format and in the fashion that it happened was a major triumph. The trouble is, we've now had 2.5 years since that World Cup of drift. And this Ashes, as I completely agree with Nick, from a playing perspective, it was dismal, the worst I've ever witnessed. But from a shock perspective, I wasn't shocked. I was shocked by England getting ripped apart 5-0 in 2006 and 2013. This time I wasn't shocked at all. The moment that first ball came down and Rory Burns' stumps went flying, I just thought, oh God, here we go. And it's been a long winter. It's been pretty depressing watching, to be perfectly honest.
Paddy, we're going to get into a few of the different reasons potentially of why there was this performance and possible ways of change or restructuring. But one of the biggest ones that has come out, and it's been spoken about by the England captain Joe Root, is the county structure within the English game. So just what does he mean when he says that it needs to be changed, and why is he saying that?
Yeah, so this is something that comes round every time sort of England lose an Ashes series in Australia, which, as Nick and Andrew have said, is all too often. And that is that county cricket just does not prepare these players for the challenge of playing Test cricket abroad, and in particular in Australia. And what they mean by that is that they aren't used to playing sort of top-class pace, bouncy bowling and decent spin bowling, really. It just doesn't come up in county cricket. County cricket tends to favour your sort of medium fast swing bowlers because the conditions in England, and when cricket is played in England at the moment in sort of April and May and the back end of the season, it favours sort of damp, overcast conditions. And that means you don't really need to bowl fast. You don't really need to make the ball bounce. You don't particularly have to have a top-class spinner. You just need to have bowlers who can move the ball and have decent control. And that doesn't set players up for the challenge of playing in Australia. And Root was asked about this after the series. He was asked if the domestic game could help improve preparations for the international game, and he did focus on the conditions.
One thing that's been evident, you look at the amount of young guys that are coming into this team and having to learn to play in situations that they should have experienced before. It's always challenging, and I really feel for them in that respect. Yes, we have to be better, and I'm not going to sit and make excuses for a batting display like that, but what I will say is that there's been a number of occasions where guys are learning in the harshest and hardest environments, whether it be in India and Asia at the start of the year, whether it be out here against two of the three best teams in the world right now.
So that was Joe Root there talking at the end of the fifth test. We did ask the England and Wales Cricket Board if anyone was available to be interviewed for this podcast, but they were not able to put anyone forward at this time. However, ahead of that fifth test, Tom Harrison, the CEO of the ECB, did speak to the BBC's cricket correspondent Jonathan Agnew and had this to say.
I don't think we can sit here hand on heart and say best v best priority for red ball cricket has been the priority for the last 2 years. We've had to get through this pandemic and keep all of our counties safe, keep all of them in business. And that has been enormously challenging. And if there have been compromises made, then potentially those compromises have been around some of the implications for playing the very best standard of first-class cricket in our home environment. Having said all of that, I don't think that a small tweak to the way in which we play red ball cricket is going to have changed the nature of what's happened in Australia.
Tom Harrison there, CEO of the ECB. Well, in a minute we will be joined by Sean Jarvis, who is the CEO of Leicestershire County Cricket Club. But before we hear from him, Paddy, what options are available then to restructure the county game, and what are the obstacles?
Yeah, there are a number of options there. I mean, you could have the revolution option, if you like, and that is reduce the number of counties that we have in England. We have 18 first-class counties in England and Wales. Australia, by contrast, in the Sheffield Shield has 6 states. Now, Jonathan Agnew, the BBC's cricket correspondent, has suggested maybe reducing that to 10 sides playing in the county championship. The advantage of that would be to have the best players playing the best players, a distillation, if you like, of talent. It perhaps would be a bit easier to schedule. But that would involve a certain amount of turkeys voting for Christmas. The counties aren't really going to vote themselves out of existence. And also it'd be doing away with a lot of history for perhaps quite questionable benefits. It would also offer reduced opportunities for diverse communities to get into the game. If there are fewer teams, there are fewer places available. And the ECB have indicated that this is not on their agenda at the moment. In the short term, this is not going to happen. What they're saying is that we don't need fewer counties, but we might need fewer matches. So that might mean changing the format. That might mean changing the way that the structure of the competition works, perhaps divisions and conferences. And they have played around with that in recent years. But I think most importantly, it means changing the schedule. And that means playing less cricket in April and May and in September, October, at the end of the season when conditions are atypical. They're not like you would get in many countries who play Test cricket. So that means playing more in the summer months when the wickets are harder and bouncier, perhaps might take a bit more spin. They have announced that there will be 2 rounds of games played in June and 3 in July. The challenge of all of this is sort of soup of competitions at the moment. There are 4 competitions across the English summer. The 4-day county championship, the 1-day cup, the T20 Blast, and the 100, which isn't played anywhere else on the globe. So you've got to sort of play Tetris with these competitions. You've got to fit them in somehow. And that is a real challenge. And it's a real challenge for players to sort of know where they are. They're sort of got to get, if you play all formats of the game, you've got to switch mode between competitions continuously. And that is a challenge. So that's something with those 4 competitions that's really going to present difficulties, I think.
It was interesting hearing Tom Harrison, Andrew, in that clip that we heard from him there, alluding to the pandemic and the costs and keeping things afloat. And if you look at formats like the 100 or, white ball cricket, do they bring more money into the game? Is this why it's happening?
Well, yes, they do. I mean, it is fair to mention the pandemic. I think it is very important to make the point that, when Chris Silverwood took over as head coach in 2019, he came on board with a view to trying to reboot red ball cricket right there and then, with get 400 runs on the board, etc. The pandemic has rather changed the way things operated. Money was so important to the ECB during that pandemic. Basically, they had to make sure the major matches took place. Everything else was secondary. And so, yes, it's a huge factor. The 100 is also a huge factor, but also, there's this problem I think the ECB have got at the moment, or English cricket as a whole has got. It's almost competing on 2 fronts with how it needs to restructure. On the one hand, it's very true that there is a need for quality over quantity to ensure that the best players play as many, concentrated, proper quality of red ball cricket. But on the flip side of that, it's actually quantity over quality is what English cricket needs to broaden its base. Because at the moment, we've got a position where English cricket is really relying on public schools and people who are already kind of into cricket already. The 100 has come along to try and broaden that base. And if you don't accept that the cricket needs to broaden that base and, drill down it, we'll talk to Leicestershire shortly, but Leicestershire, a classic example of a club that, is on the one hand, quality-wise is not good enough at the moment, but in terms of quantity, the number of players that could bubble up through Leicestershire's systems if they manage to get down into the Asian communities, all the rest of it, is absolutely huge. And so it's a really difficult balance to have to strike. And that, I guess, is really where this red ball reset comes in. What do they do to try and make sure that they get the balance, those 2 priorities right?
Well, let's bring in somebody who no doubt will probably want to give severe backing to the county game. Sean Jarvis joins us, Leicestershire's CEO. Sean, what have you made of this week in particular and the attention and focus on the county game and the problems that many people are saying are inherent within it at the moment?
Hi, everybody. I just want to correct Andrew. Just to begin with, we are improving, Andrew. We're on the way up. We had 60 personal bests last year, best 4-day home win record for 20 years, our best overall win ratio for some 15 years, and a third of our first team squad are from our academy. In answer to your question, Sarah, there's been an awful lot of debate. My background is 25 years in sport, having predominantly worked in football, but also rugby league. So I'm relatively newcomer to the game. So it's been fascinating watching and listening the fallout on the back of the Ashes losses. So for me, it's been fascinating. But equally, I've been interested to see the community of cricket, how they've responded to some of the comments that have been made. And it is crystal clear that the people out there, the supporters of cricket, want county cricket to continue. And the idea, the notion of reducing counties is, in my opinion, is obviously quite ridiculous.
And that would specifically affect your club, county, an awful lot more than potentially some of the others, wouldn't it?
Of course, yeah. We're regularly mooted as one of those counties. But I've got to say, we're here to try and expand the game, create bigger interest in the game. And that's what we are beginning to see here again in Leicestershire. COVID gave us the opportunity to press the reset button, and our women and girls game is growing, bigger membership here at Leicestershire. So me, actually, personally, I would like to see increase in teams. Everybody's talking about reducing. I'd like to see 20 teams. So I'd like to see Shropshire or Devon or Lincolnshire actually come into the equation and maybe have 2 divisions of 10 and grow it in that way. I think by introducing more teams, then we can have increased participation and increase the quality.
In terms of revenue and keeping your club afloat, where does the significant portion of your revenue come from in terms of the formats?
The lion's share obviously comes at the moment, our dependency on the ECB, but we have to generate income in other ways, and that's by engagement through commercial partners, by building revenue streams that we have here at the club, merchandise, ticket sales. And we're beginning to see, because we're getting our house in order, and I think this is the other thing, clubs have got to look at themselves in the mirror and think about how they develop their businesses so that their finances can be reinvested into the club. So for us, our membership's on the increase by about 30% this year. We're seeing corporate sales on the up, so we're increasing our hospitality offering. So it's capitalising on all those opportunities that are presented to the ground. And if you can do that and reinvest, the club will only get stronger and stronger and stronger.
Sean, Patrick here. Just one. I mean, you mentioned a number of sort of diverse communities perhaps becoming interested in the game, and obviously the numbers playing it are enormous. At what stage do you think that they are sort of dropping away from cricket? Is it sort of at county trial level? Is it at the academy level? Is it going on towards the first team? At what stage is the sort of the barrier at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. I think, and what we've got to do is try to encourage that. I think there are a lot of misconceptions or perceptions around cricket, and we've got to change those. And with the EDI strategy that's coming out from the ECB, I think that will take time. We here at Leicestershire are very proactive on that. We, as a county, have got 56 different diverse communities, and we're very exposed to all those. So it's about how we tolerate, how we learn, how we develop. We've got to get our message into those communities. You can't sit here and expect people to come. You've got to actually draw them in, participate, and create some initiatives and really be, I guess, the fabric of your community. And that's what cricket clubs have to do. They have to get into that grass level. Once you start taking that away at first-class county level, it's going to disappear. It's going to disappear. So I'm all for what Andrew said there. It's not an overnight, there's not a silver bullet here. This is a slow process of building and building and building the quality. And there are many, many silver bullets to add the solution. And I think the knee-jerk reaction is to actually say, well, we lost the Ashes, what load of rubbish we are. No, let's focus on becoming number one Test team again. Let's focus on winning the World Cup. Let's focus on winning the T20 World Cup. Let's focus on those sorts of things and how we do that. And as a game, communicate it. One of the things that I've spotted since I've come into the game is that, yes, some of the players don't cut it and actually go away from the game. I'm very keen here at Leicestershire. So, for example, I've got two players here who have got university degrees, fantastic, really proud of them. Whether they actually go on to become long-term cricketers is another matter. They have to prove that in terms of their stats and performances. Assuming they don't, they will disappear from the game. And I think that's really sad. Those people who have got that knowledge, got that experience, got that intelligence, we should be retaining those people inside the game to be the next generation of chief exec, to be the next generation of CEO. And that's something that we're very passionate about here at Leicestershire. And that's why we call ourselves the Academy of Cricket. So we're working with our universities how we can do that and keep those people inside the game. Because if you keep the think tank, the grey matter in the game will only progress and get better.
Sean, it's been brilliant to get your thoughts on the Sports Desk podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sarah, Andrew, Patrick, and of course, Nick. Good to meet. Hopefully see you at Grace Road sometime.
Sean Jarvis there, Leicestershire CEO. Let's get a county player's view on all this now, Paddy, because you have been speaking to the Kent all-rounder Darren Stevens. What has he had to say and why is he significant?
That's right. So, well, if you're not aware of Darren Stevens, he's now 45. He's 46 in April. He actually started at Leicestershire, but he's been Kent's top wicket taker the last few seasons, and he was last season. A couple of years ago, he was actually one of the Wisden Cricketers of the Year. He's sort of in his prime, in his 40s. And he bowls around sort of 70 to 75 very much tops, miles an hour. He swings the ball about. He's very, very accurate, and he's enormously successful. So successful, in fact, that the Australians who play in county cricket have a WhatsApp group called Steve-O's Gonna Get Ya. Now, he's held up as an archetype, as a sort of the dibbly-dobbly county bowler who trundles in, he puts it on a line of length, he moves it about a bit, and he's very successful. And it's argued that there are just too many of these people in county cricket, and it shows that they're not providing the kind of challenge that you need in Test cricket. Now Darren obviously takes some issue with that, and I began by asking him why he thought England had struggled in Australia.
It's the prep, isn't it? It didn't help. Whether they have 3 warm-up games, and it was 5 days of them, 9 days were rained off. So that's not a great start for a start. But to me this year it was a lot of the preparation. You get on the back foot, and it's hard to get back, especially over there with their supporters.
I mean, you see a lot of these guys close up, and you'll know their weaknesses because you frequently exploit them. Do you think there are technical problems developing in batters now? Are they not prepared for Test or batting for a long time? Yeah, there's a lot of flawed techniques out there. But why is that? It's 2020 cricket. It's 100 ball cricket. It's even shorter. It's 50 over stuff. They want to be going at 5, 6 and over. In 50 over stuff, they want to be going at 10, 12 and over, and in 2020 and 100 ball stuff. So, going from that and jumping back into 4-day cricket, it's just not. It ain't gonna work unless you're mentally strong, or your game doesn't change much, or your technique doesn't change much in 2020. And if Test cricket's going to get back to where it is, then they've got to stop prioritising 4-day cricket again. And although the nearest you got to the Ashes was watching it on telly, your name is often mentioned afterwards as being perhaps the archetypal English cricketer who profits from conditions like, as you say, in April and May. Does it annoy you when you're not blamed for it, but you're mentioned as being part of the problem when you've done so much?
I suppose it grates on you a little bit. I get mentioned about these pitches early season. Yeah, fine. I'm going to lick my lips. There's a green top. I'm bowling 20 overs. Do you know what I mean? It's, but that's my job. Yeah, I'm a batsman. But if I do a job with a ball, and if my job's to hit a few pads or if you nick a few people off on a green top, then that's my job to win a game of cricket for Kent.
Well, don't forget you can subscribe to the Sports Desk podcast every week from BBC Sounds or any other podcast provider. You can download our back catalogue of deep dives into many of the topics. Last week we looked ahead to next month's Winter Olympics and the alleged human rights abuses surrounding the host nation China. Just search for the Sports Desk.
This is the Sports Desk.
Well, in 2019, England cricket was on top of the world. Owen Morgan's one-day team won England's first ever Cricket World Cup. Morgan and Andrew Strauss, who was Director of Cricket at the ECB from 2015 to 2018, were heralded as the men behind this success. But have the achievements in the white ball form of the game had an impact on the youth and grassroots development in England, with a move away from more traditional batting techniques? To discuss this, we are joined on the Sports Desk by former England batter and batting coach Mark Ramprakash. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. Really appreciate your time. Obviously, everybody has been talking about the many reasons why and batting and coaching has come up significantly in the last few days in particular. What's your view on the coaching setup in England and where improvements can be made and why it's crumbling at the moment?
Well, a very good afternoon. That is a very good question, and you're right. There are many elements to it, I think. When it comes to players and coaching, we've lost some of perhaps the traditional basics that young players would learn in their formative years that would allow them both to go out and play first-class cricket, but also one-day cricket successfully. And so we are seeing a very much a smaller pool of players who have the traditional basics that perhaps would allow them to be successful at first-class cricket. And people might say, well, what's the difference between first-class cricket and the white ball game? Well, the first-class game, the red ball swings, it seams, it can spin. And so you have to have extra skill, I think, as a first-class player to be able to handle that and to play an innings in that format. So of course, T20, it's less balls. The white ball doesn't really do that. It doesn't really swing or seam. And so they can get into sort of different types of positions. And I think that's fundamentally where we've seen a shift.
In terms of what you're saying there, Mark, I'm just interested in your perspective on playing the seaming swinging ball, because obviously we just heard from Darren Stevens defending the fact that he's a guy who can bowl, swing and seam and all the rest of it. It's very interesting, going back to that point about the WhatsApp group, Steve-O's going to get you. Two of the guys who were within that WhatsApp group, Marnus Labuschagne and Travis Head, arrived on a seaming deck at Hobart at 12 for 3, and then produced a pair of innings that turned the game in Australia's favour. They actually played English conditions better than England's players. It does strike me that Australia ended up with a position whereby their ability to travel around and sample alternative first-class competitions overseas has been a big factor in them being better than us in our own conditions.
Well, I mean, you've mentioned two players there. I mean, they didn't have particularly good times in English county cricket. They struggled. Where I would compliment them as professional players, and also I think what are they in their mid to late 20s, where I would compliment them is to take those experiences and learn from them, and then get better and find a way how they want to go out and play. So belief and confidence come into that. Look, some of the professional players, the young professional players that I've been working with, I think they've got a little bit clouded. And what I mean, so that if they're playing a lot of championship cricket in April, May on very bowler-friendly wickets, your confidence can really be eroded and your method questioned.
Also interested to get your thoughts on this next point as well, in terms of development and young players coming through, because Matt Pryor has tweeted that he has two boys in Sussex in the pathway there. It costs them nearly £1,000 per season per kid, coaching and specific training and playing kit that they need. He says last year they tried to charge £300 for 10 online sessions. He says he's been appalled by this for years and it needs to change. And we have been able to have an interview with Matt Pryor, so let's have a listen to what he has had to say this morning.
In simple terms, you're not selecting the best, most talented cricketers. You are selecting the cricketers that can afford it. And you are ultimately narrowing down your base and number of kids that will have the opportunity to go on and work on their potential and hopefully achieve their potential and go on and represent not only Sussex or the counties, but England and having a really strong England test team or one-day team or whatever it is. So in essence, as I've said, cricket already has many barriers. You can't have the jumpers for goalposts. It's not like football, where you can just a couple of jumps down and have a kickabout. You need a field, or in essence, you need a field. There are other ways you can do it, of course, but stumps, bats, access, all of that stuff. There are so many barriers, and I don't understand why we're putting another massive financial barrier in place, because it is ultimately stopping raw talent coming through.
Matt Pryor there. And on the podcast so far, Mark, we've dealt with, the county structure, how it works or it doesn't. We've talked to you there about, batting techniques and coaching and what's being taught at a young level. But access is also really important, isn't it? And it's been, particularly around the Azim Rafiq stuff as well, in terms of who's playing cricket and the pathways coming through and whether enough talent is getting right to the top. What's your take on it?
Well, I agree with many of the things that Matt Pryor has said there. This issue is not, I wouldn't say it's particularly new. I would say that on county academies, I think, to my knowledge, Middlesex and Surrey, you can go back 10 years ago. And if they have 12 boys on the academy, it's more than likely that 10 or 11 will be from a private school. I think you can trace it back to maybe taking, cricket off the BBC. So cricket has had to some degree a dwindling audience, and there has been an economic barrier. The ECB would say that that's the reason why they've introduced the 100, and two benefits clearly is to get it back on the BBC, which it is, and also you've got the women's game there to try and grow the game and to make the game more accessible to people. But if school playing fields are being sold off and club cricket is perhaps struggling, it's a tricky thing. I can only agree, and we as a governing body, the ECB, I'm sure are trying but they need to try harder into keep working on the development of the game and the interest of the game amongst a lot of people. The state schools, cricket is non-existent, but it's been like that for quite some time.
Ramsden actually works in public school, and the one thing that surprised me when I looked into this last year was the arms race between some of the schools to pick out the best talent. So you get the schools going into the academies at the counties, picking out the best players, offering them 100% scholarships, 110, 120% scholarships in some cases, and actually paying the parents to send the kids to their school. So they are going in and plucking out, and that is obviously because there's no cricket at state school level. That's one aspect of it all. And secondly, we heard from Sean Jarvis earlier talking about their great work within some of the communities in Leicestershire. It's a fact that Leicestershire and many other counties have abandoned those communities for decades, and they're actually now rectifying that in Leicestershire, which is great. And Surrey also have started to work with the ACE programme and trying to reach out to black communities in South London that, again, they have abandoned for decades. So maybe in time this will improve. There's a couple of points in there, obviously about state schools and about the public schools, and the counties. But I think it does all breed into that subject of accessibility to the game.
Absolutely. So it's absolutely fundamental to the future of the game. I mean, Azim Rafiq has been mentioned in passing just there. And what came out in that DCMS hearing was ultimately the ECB have been forced to address this probably for the first time. They brought out their Asian action plan in 2018. But, this has forced their hand a little bit more. And one of the most specific points, so they brought out a 11-point plan, 5 subheadings. One of the most specific points centred on coaching at youth level. It's absolutely, it's the blockage in the pipeline, essentially. You've got all these kids in Parks Leagues and Asian Parks Leagues and what have you who have been marginalised by the history of county cricket and the elitism of it, etc. And now suddenly, if you've got them coming through the pipeline and they hit a blockage whereby, as Nick says, you've got these coaches at youth level who are more interested in the public school boys and the money they can make by coaching them on the side and all the rest of it. That is the biggest problem. I saw Rob Key was tweeting about it. I think Sky did a pod on it a couple of days ago, talking about how if the 100 is a success, the profits of that 100 should be ploughed straight back into making youth level cricket free. Free, all kids have to buy helmets these days. You can't play cricket without a helmet, let alone a bat. All these things are overheads that the game simply cannot afford if they want to breach out to marginalised communities. So it's a fundamental point. The game claims it's got, the 1.1 billion pounds of rights that they got for the last 5-year cycle. They've got to plough that back into the sport at the absolute grassroots level if they want to ensure that it has a sustainable future beyond that elite public school level.
Mark, before we let you go, do you get a sense that it is different than 4 years ago when I know you would have been involved in a lot of the same conversations?
Is this different? Yes, perhaps so. I think, things are becoming more and more apparent. So, I mentioned about the shift I think 10 or 12 years ago where one-day cricket in particular really came to the fore, and we're seeing a generation of kids come through having seen a lot of one day cricket and sort of want to emulate that. And that amongst young professionals, a lot of their training and practice is actually practicing the one day skills. Now that probably means they're spending less time maybe on the you might describe as the more traditional skills that you need perhaps in the longer format. So there are a lot of T20 leagues around the world, and a lot of players are perhaps looking at those and thinking, well, I can play for my county, and I can, if I become a good T20 player, I can go around the world and earn some good money in different competitions, and I don't necessarily have to play for England to sort of make a good living. I think that is a difference. And you've got young players, and someone like a Joe Clark and Ben Duckett. They are very talented young English batsmen. They've been involved with England Lions, but actually now they're off, playing in the Big Bash and different T20 competitions, when traditionally players would perhaps go overseas and work on their longer format first-class skills. So there has been a shift in attitude. And All I'm saying is I think we should, embrace the one-day cricket. It's great, it's fun, but I think we just need to look after our first-class cricket and sort of help in the messaging and the language for aspiring players to still see that as the ultimate challenge and to make that an exciting challenge to embrace.
Mark, really appreciate your time on the Sports Desk podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Mark Ramprakash there, former England batter and batting coach. Right, let's have a look at one country which continues to punch above its weight when it comes to all forms of international cricket, because it is New Zealand, the number one ranked ODI team. They have appeared in the last 3 white ball finals. While losing in all 3 of those finals, they did manage to go one better last year and were crowned the inaugural World Test champions by beating India at Lord's. And I've been speaking to New Zealand-based cricket journalist Liam Napier, who began by taking me back to the moment that led to New Zealand having their own reset.
I think you have to go back quite a few years, probably to 2013. And, that was a real nadir of New Zealand cricket going to South Africa and getting rolled for 45. New Zealand cricket holds the record, the ignominy of getting rolled for 26. So 45 wasn't quite as bad, but it was still a low moment, a sort of rock bottom moment, and that sort of really forced a lot of introspection and reflection on where the team was, how to go about rebuilding it. And I think for a number of years they tried to emulate a lot of other cricketing nations, particularly Australia, and their brash confidence and sort of try and project confidence, but so it really forced them to consider their identity and culture, and what they came out with was something a lot more authentic.
Because the player pool, if you look at the numbers just generally in New Zealand and the population in comparison to some of the bigger nations, with this current crop, it doesn't seem to impact it. But is there work on a level below, top level cricket of generating talent to come through and making sure the pathways are open so that, that they can challenge potentially those top cricketers? Is that something that is part of the game in New Zealand?
At the top level, there is quite a good pool of depth that New Zealand can call on. Like the Black Caps just had their tour to Australia 2020 and one day tour cancelled because of travel restrictions, and none of the test players were going to travel on that tour, and so they were going to send a crop of white ball cricketers. Even then, they would have been expected to compete with Australia, which says a lot about the depth of pool of talent coming through the domestic game, which is not really a vaunted arena, globally.
Do you think this will continue, or is it the current crop of players that you have?
I think it is a golden generation, and I think there will be a drop-off, and it could be quite significant. You look at the age of a number of the test side in particular, Trent Boult, Tim Southey, Kane Williamson, Ross Taylor's just retired. So you've got a number of guys in that, early to mid 30 bracket. There are a group of talented cricketers coming through, but you don't replace a lot of those guys very easily. So
Liam Napier there, cricket journalist based in New Zealand. Andrew, really interesting to hear of some of the things, because they have been, put out there as New Zealand can do it, why can't England? But I wonder, he mentions the golden generation, and is it just going to be cyclical with England as well? Is it just, that maybe this just isn't the time, for having the best talent to be able to compete?
I don't think there's going to be a massive concern for younger players coming through. I mean, there will be, that generation's already 6 years on from the 2015 World Cup. They've just had the World Test Championship victory last year, final last month. They're doing fine, and they have got that core of sporty outdoorness that I think will stand them in good stead. I'm more worried about English cricket because it's not cyclical if no one cares. If people aren't going to get wound up by the fact that England have lost the Ashes again, just going to say, oh, never mind, I'll just go to sleep now, and what else is on? Oh, look, the tennis is on. They move on to something else. It's not quite as simple as that for English.
So, Nick, you're the expert then in New Zealand and England adopting that approach.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say I'm the expert, but but I think it proved you never waste a good crisis, and that's what happened with the one-day team in 2015. They had a terrible World Cup under Owen Morgan's captaincy, and the focus was shifted onto white ball cricket, and he did copy an awful lot of his ideas from Brendan McCullum and the way the New Zealand team were led. And the same can happen for the Test team. England were very, very poor in Australia, but they made so many fundamental mistakes in terms of decisions, selection, the management of the tour. These are all things that can be changed relatively quickly with different people in charge. And the talent is there. They can bounce back. They just need to have that reset, as we mentioned earlier, and learn some of the things that the white ball team managed to put in place. Pick a settled team, identify the way you want to play, and stick with it and keep going.
So you mentioned different people in charge. Who in that leadership group, or where would you make those differences or changes?
Well, I think Chris Silverwood has had a tough time in Australia. He was it was a hospital pass, being the England coach during COVID. How you can prepare for a Test series against Australia without any warm-up games, you can't. Basically, we've just seen that. So. But it's a pattern. England have not been good enough under Chris Silverwood. They have struggled for results. They lost at home last summer for the first time as well. Let's not forget. Ashley Giles designed the system. He got rid of Ed Smith last year, promoted Chris Silverwood. He designed the system. Chris Silverwood failed to implement it, and I think that's where you look at the moment for change within the England management. Joe Root is a Test captain. There isn't really any alternative to him at the moment, unfortunately. He's not had a great time, but there isn't really an alternative, so you can stick with him. But if you get a little bit of better management, some more ideas, then perhaps they can turn it around pretty quickly.
So, Paddy, finally, next Ashes tour in Australia, are we all going to be lauding the success and all the work, the hard work that has been put in to implement all these changes, or are we going to be here yet again on this same podcast? Hopefully not.
Well, history tells us we probably will be here again. England don't have a record of learning from their mistakes. I think something Andrew said was very interesting. It isn't cyclical if no one cares. And the fact is that this England cricket team doesn't look like the nation. If you look at the English football team that made the final of the Euros back last year, then they look like the nation. They look and sound like the nation. The England cricket team don't. So they have to have something that grabs the country's attention and that they can identify with. Perhaps Ben Stokes' innings at Headingley a few years back when he was so heroic and it was so dramatic. There was something you could grab onto, something you could identify with. This England team don't have that at the moment. So we're sort of an existential moment, I think, for English Test cricket. They have to have something that the country can believe in and that gives them some sort of identity. That, above all, is the most important thing. It might not mean that they win every series. I think we're a long way from that. But they do have to have something that people can buy into.